Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, President Obama weighed in yesterday on the terrorist attacks, and, he had this to say, and I guess it's probably more important than what he didn't say.
We've seen what was apparently a pipe bomb go off in New Jersey, in Seaside Park, where it could have seriously injured our U.S. Marines and spectators who were there for a race. The bombing in the Chelsea neighborhood here in New York injured more than 24 people. At this point, we see no connection between that incident and what happened here in New York and New Jersey. The FBI is investigating the Minnesota incident as a potential act of terrorism. We will direct the full resources of the federal government to make sure that the investigation goes forward aggressively.
That's a real scintillating statement he offered. I'll tell you what, the astounding thing about that statement is in context. He is unwilling to call these acts of terrorism, possible act of terrorism in St. Cloud, invoking Allah, asking one of the stabbing victims if they're Muslim. Possible.
He just charged me with the knife and he said, "Are you a Muslim? Are you a Muslim?" But how do you even respond to that? Like when somebody has a knife like a foot from your face.
And that man survived.
And
he was stabbed.
President
but was
Obama
asked the question.
And President Obama's response would be, "Well, we're going to have law enforcement look into it. We'll get back to you with an answer."
The hero officer said he was praising Allah the whole time while stabbing people too. But it's possible terrorism.
And even New York Mayor de Blasio, who would only say the bombs were intentional acts, thank you for that, over the weekend. Even he yesterday had to come to the realization and offer that clearly the evidence suggests these were acts of terrorism and the perpetrator a terrorist, and also open the door to, an international connection that neither he nor New York Governor Andrew Cuomo wanted to open over the weekend. Now that door's open, but not for the President of the United States. He is more passive, more effete, weaker than the hardest left elected official in the country, arguably, Mayor de Blasio, the biggest Islamic terrorist apologist on the Eastern Seaboard in Mayor de Blasio. President Obama, weaker than that. President Obama, a bigger apologist. And he has stiff competition. It's from Hillary Clinton, who he demands people vote for her, and that demand is falling increasingly on deaf ears. It's interesting, particularly among minority voters, with Trump's numbers among black voters, among Latino voters, even among millennials that are souring on Clinton. But she basically said, look, it's all Trump's fault. Hillary did.
Secondly, we know that Donald Trump's comments have been used online for recruitment of terrorists.
So that's something she said before, and she's trotting it out again. And I think it will be about as effective now as it has been to this point in the campaign. Speaking of the campaign, we're pleased to now be joined by Pete Hoekstra. He was an 18-year congressman from Michigan, 2nd Congressional District in Michigan. During his time in the House, he served on the Select Committee on Intelligence, including as its chairman. He is now a senior fellow with the Investigative Project on Terrorism and also a Trump campaign surrogate on national security. Congressman Hoekstra, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, good to be with you this morning. Thank you.
So what was your reaction to the reactions from Hillary Clinton and President Obama yesterday?
Well, I mean, you were talking also about the mayor of New York, de Blasio. Number one, it's just very interesting and frustrating to listen to the linguistic gymnastics that they go through over the weekend to do everything but say this is a radical jihadist terrorist attack, an intentional explosion. Well, thank you, Mayor. That is really, really enlightening.
Right.
Then the description from, the president. And then Hillary Clinton saying, well, this is Donald Trump's fault. Does that remind us of anything? Sure. It reminds us of Benghazi when she said, well, it's really not the Muslims' fault or the people who killed our ambassador and 3 other Americans in Benghazi. Really it's our fault because we had a filmmaker in Los Angeles who put out this terrible video, and that's why they're angry at us. So don't look at them. We need to look at ourselves, and it's time to say, no, these people hate us, and the sooner we recognize that fact, and until we recognize that fact, we will not be able to contain, confront, and ultimately defeat this enemy. America's looking for leadership.
Well, what do you think is the underlying reason why they won't come out and say what it is and call it what it is, terrorism and a terrorist attack?
I mean, they're accountable for that. I can't explain it, and this is why she's failing so miserably at the polls because the American people look at this. They look at what's going on in St. Cloud, and let's say, okay, a guy with a knife asking people if they're Muslim, yelling Allah Akbar, and then stabbing 8-9 people. That kind of looks like a radical jihadist attack to me. I wonder why our leadership can't say that. And remember, this whole narrative goes against what Hillary and Barack Obama believe. They believe that much of the problem that we see in the Middle East and the problem that we see with radical jihadists is the fault of American behavior and American policy. Beginning in 2009, they decided to engage with the Muslim Brotherhood. They overthrew Mubarak, they overthrew Gaddafi, and they thought that this would bring reform, democracy, and prosperity to the Middle East. They were dead wrong. We're paying the price for it today, but they really think it's more of our problem than it is theirs. And if we change our behavior, they will change their behavior. Radical jihadists will not change their behavior.
Well, and Josh Earnest, flacking for the regime, said yesterday, it's mainly a narrative challenge. And while, propaganda, the language we use, the way we explain issues to generate support, to define our opposition, that's important. But the idea of saying it's mainly, the main thrust of this is narrative, a competition of narratives, seems to me a little Pollyannish.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, tell that to the religious minorities, the Christians, the Yazidis, and the Jewish folks, whatever are left in the Middle East, and the horror that they've faced over the last 4 or 5 years. Tell that to the people of Syria, of Libya, and Egypt, those who died in Brussels or in Nice or in Orlando. Yeah, this is really just about narrative, and if we get the narrative right, everything will be just fine. No, these are bloodthirsty killers. They go after, Americans. They go after Europeans. They go after Christians. They go after Jews. They go after Muslims. No one is safe from these folks.
Knowing what you know about the Taliban, recently he was in Pakistan. His wife was there, but he was in the Taliban area
The Chelsea
of Pakistan.
bomber.
Yeah, the Chelsea bomber.
Yep.
Do you think his father, who traveled with him there, was involved? And if they lived in such close quarters, how could he not have known about his son's plans, sinister plans?
Yeah, I think we'll see how much information comes out in the next couple of days. But it appears that I think it may have been his brother who put some radical jihadist posts up on his Facebook or tweeted some of those types of things. You have to believe that the family or some of the family knew, maybe not of the specific intentions of what he was going to do, but that he was approaching and had become radicalized, and that it should have been brought to the attention of the authorities.
And is it normal that the Taliban hasn't claimed responsibility for it yet?
No, actually, some of the sources that we're dealing with at the Investigative Project on Terrorism told us, over the weekend that if they captured him alive, that it might be unlikely, at least for a period of time, that any organization, ISIS, Al Qaeda, or the Taliban, would claim credit for this. Not sure exactly why, but we've received that information 48 hours ago. Don't expect a claim for credit if he's captured alive.
We're talking to Pete Hoekstra. He's a senior fellow with the Investigative Project on Terrorism that he was just referencing. I also, you spoke about linguistic gymnastics, also the offering that Hillary Clinton provided again yesterday, and President Obama has done this as well as many on the left. This idea that, we being those who are not of the left, are trying to launch a war against the religion of Islam. And we have to remember that there's peaceful pluralist Muslims, and it's a small percentage of Muslims that are violent jihadists, and so on and so forth. All these arguments that we concede, they're making an argument in the face of no opposition to that argument. It is pure sophistry. And it just speaks to me to the unwillingness, as Ron Johnson said yesterday, Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin said yesterday, to deny reality in their minds, it must be for some sort of political gain.
It is for a political game. They're the ones that are spreading the narrative that this is a war against Islam. I traveled through the Middle East repeatedly. I met lots of good Muslims. The American military, our CIA, they engaged with hundreds, if not thousands, of Iraqi and Afghanistan Muslims who helped us fight the Taliban, who helped us fight Saddam Hussein, and to fight Al-Qaeda. And, they sacrificed. Many of them, lost their lives after America abandoned them. And so, we know there's lots of good Muslims, people who have put their lives on the line. We know that there's Muslims that, that are fighting these folks each and every day, and that they make up a large number of the victims. And so, we recognize that. What's amazing to me is that the president and Hillary Clinton aren't willing to admit that, a number of these individuals do hate America. And again, until we identify and confront it, we will not be able to defeat it.
Now, somebody with your expertise, again, I mentioned at the outset, 18 years in Congress, nearly a decade on the House Select Committee on Intelligence. A lot has been made of the question of Trump's fitness to be commander-in-chief. Robert Gates had an editorial in the Wall Street Journal on Friday suggesting he was unfit to be commander-in-chief. 100 or so military brass suggest otherwise, those who've endorsed Trump. And we've talked to individuals who've been part of foreign policy, national security briefings with Trump. I wonder what your personal interaction has been and your assessment with respect to this most awesome of responsibilities for the President of the United States.
Oh, no. I mean, I've met with Donald Trump, and we've talked about national security issues. And in those meetings, he acts exactly like I would expect a CEO or a leader to behave. Number one, he lets someone else run the meeting. In my case, it was Rudy Giuliani. He asks good, penetrating questions. He has a sense of humor. He throws out, potential courses of action and listens to the people around the table and gets their feedback and perhaps modifies that. And so, no, he's the one thing we know about Donald Trump and his history as a businessman and what we're seeing in politics is that he brings in quality people. He knows how to get the best out of them. He learns from them. He's asking questions constantly because he wants to make sure that he understands what's going on and that he's getting all of the information that his experts, that they have gathered through their years of experience. Of course, this individual is qualified to be president. He's got the tone, the temperament, the knowledge, the experience to lead in situations like this and work through the problems and get to the core of the issue and decide what needs to be done.
All right. He is Pete Hoekstra, former Michigan congressman from Michigan's 2nd Congressional District, and now a senior fellow with the Investigative Project on Terrorism. Congressman Hoekstra, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, great being with you. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.